Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're back with another SEC team preview here. We've got the LSU Tigers. Before we do dive in, if you have been enjoying our off-season content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate everyone's support. But looking here first at the offensive side of the ball for LSU, obviously kind of dove into the portal quite a bit here, at least for their main contributors. What strengths do you see on this side of the ball?
Yeah, I think this is an improved shooting roster. I think that's kind of the first thing that I would note. And, you're also just bringing in players that have been productive offensive pieces, albeit at like some lower level schools. Like, I don't think any of them are coming from power conference ranks necessarily, or at least the guys that look like they're in the starting lineup, but they all have traits that seem to be able to translate here. Starts with D. Thomas, who's coming from UNLV, who he averaged 15.6 points per game and 4.7 assists per game last season. And I think he should be the engine for this offense. I think he's going to do a lot of things that just it wasn't really presented to this offense last season. I think mostly just as a ball handling threat and actually just being a point guard presence in general. Like, I think this is an improved ball handling team, and just I think the turnover rate improves, and D. Thomas is going to single-handedly improve them in this area. The last two seasons, LSU 284th and 290th nationally in turnover rate, but I wouldn't really classify any of the players on either of those rosters as a true point guard. I just didn't really see any. So I do think D. Thomas is at least going to provide something there, and then something in the pick and roll as well as a scorer and playmaker. Not the most efficient scorer, but as a playmaker, I think he brings some stuff to the table. They bring in some other wing pieces in Rashad King. I think he'll be a serviceable piece that can score in multiple ways. Like, he really likes the mid-range area, so I do think that's going to be an area that he operates a lot. And one guy that I think is probably a bit underrated is Max McKinnon, who's coming from Portland. He played a heavy on-ball role at Portland and Elon at his school before that, but I think he's going to be able to slide into more of a secondary role here because I think his off-ball skill set is much better than the volume that he's received throughout his career. I think he's going to be a nice catch-and-shoot option, but like I mentioned, his volume has been pretty low. He was 77th percentile in catch-and-shoot efficiency last season, 91st percentile at Elon the year before, and you can kind of prove that he's a good perimeter shooter on high volume with his free throw percentage. I mean, he shot at 108 for 120 last season, which is good for 90% at the free throw line. So it just proves that I think he has a repeatable stroke. Obviously, it's a little bit different, and he's going to need to fan it out to the three-point line with more volume. But I am willing to bet that he's going to be a pretty good shooter. And then there's a couple returning pieces obviously coming back as well, in Jalen Reed and Robert Miller. I'm not sure when Jalen Reed's coming back. He's coming off that torn ACL. I think I saw he got cleared for 5-on-5. I'm not completely sure if he'll start on time. I would assume maybe it's like a December timeline for him, but he's a guy that they can play through a little bit in the front court. And I think both of these guys are pretty solid lob threats. So when you have an experienced backcourt with a front court that's been here before and can contribute in like some secondary actions. So ultimately it's interesting group. On the offensive end, I think it's a higher floor than they've had the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I really took note of when I was going through watching stuff on them is I think they're going to take care of the basketball a lot better this year. I mean, just having D. Thomas now as like a true point guard, a guy that did a really good job, at UNLV, taking care of the ball, 28% assist rate to a 14% turnover rate over the course of 2 seasons with a usage rate at like 25%. So, I think that's going to be a real strength compared to like previous years. Because, I forget if you said it, but last year they were like the last 2 years, I think they've been around 290 in offensive turnover rate. So definitely been an area of concern for LSU the last couple of years. I think it should be much improved here this season. Then you mentioned some of the other pieces coming in, like King, like McKinnon. In terms of weaknesses, primarily for me, I think it's just like the guard efficiency overall. I'm not in love with, right? We look at a guy like Dedan Thomas who, you know, likes to live in the mid range. So I mean, I think this kind of goes hand in hand, the efficiency and the shot diet of the offensive group, like you mentioned already, um, with Rashad King, loves to live in the mid range. Then you look at like Dedan Thomas, right? Last year, 259 2-point attempts, 169 of those were non-rim twos, right? So likes to live in the mid-range. He was very inefficient last year, 45% effective field goal percentage. Rashad King has a career 47% effective field goal percentage. Another guy that, 122 non-rim twos last year. So, he lives also in the mid-range. I just have concerns with the overall shot selection of this guard group in general. And then the other thing I thought was worthy of mentioning was just like secondary, just like on ball depth at the guard spot. Like I just like Max McKinnon, we've seen him do it at a pretty high level. He's a good passer at Portland, at Elon, as you said, but I have some concerns just watching the tape of him and like how he will truly create against SEC level talent. He's not like he doesn't have the quickest burst. While he is a good passer, like is he going to be able to take guys off the bounce and create plays as like a secondary creator for alongside Dedan Thomas? I have some concerns. Rashad King is fine. He's a good athlete, as we mentioned, like back in the transfer portal review. Like he's a bouncier athlete that's pretty good in transition. But he's struggled with like turnovers. Last year, 16% turnover rate compared to a 19% assist rate. But you dive a little bit deeper, and over the course of his career, he's had some turnover issues, particularly when competition picks up a little bit. It's like last year in 2 top 100 games, 23.5% turnover rate. I have some issues with the secondary on ball creation alongside Dedan Thomas. Like he's going to play a lot of minutes, so he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot, but that's just another area of concern I have with the offense.
Yeah, shot diet is my main concern for sure. And just to add on to the Dedan Thomas, like mid-range heavy shot diet, like when you look at rim and 3 rate, he was in the first percentile for CBB analytics. And then when your dribble jumper efficiency is in the 7th percentile, like it's not really the greatest outlook. Like you're not even all that efficient in the shots that you are taking at the highest volume. So it does create some concern there. I think he brings more positives than negatives just as a handler and as a passer and as an actual point guard presence that this team has lacked in the last couple of seasons. But, the shot diet across the board is fairly rough. And then when you have a front court group that doesn't really generate rim attempts at a high level, like they can be efficient at the rim, but it's the matter that they don't create those attempts at a high level. Like I think Jalen Reed is going to be that guy. He's never been like a extremely high rim rate guy. Robert Miller is a play finisher. And then you have a guy in Markel Sutton, who I talked about during the portal review as a guy that has had great raw numbers at Nebraska Omaha. I just don't really see how he translates. I'm not going to talk about everything on here. We can check out the portal review if you want to see my thoughts there. It's just the main thing is like he's an interior scoring reliant 4-man who was in the 34th percentile as a rim scorer in the Summit League. So I think that kind of sums it up for me. And it's a guy that doesn't get on the offensive glass, and he's not really great in secondary actions on the perimeter. He shot at 28% from 3. So I am not really a fan of his game translating overall. And yeah, I mean, to your point about the creation to help out, I think they have guys that have the ability to create, like you mentioned. It's just how efficient is it going to be, and that obviously all comes back around to shot diet. And if they're not going to take care of the ball at a super high level, and they're not going to get on the offensive glass, like it creates a fairly poor outlook here.
Yeah, no, I think so. Shifting to the defensive side of the ball now, they turn to the portal a little bit. They have guys coming back. I think that can help in an area that they really struggled last year, which they were in the bottom 20 in defensive rebound rate last year. I think that they maybe turn to the portal a little bit to try and address this issue a little bit. But do you see some improvement in that area? And then what other strengths do you see on this side of the ball for LSU?
Potentially an improvement on the glass. It's something that McMahon teams have never really been great at, and I think the main front court rotation of like Sutton, Reed, and Robert Miller is like they're a little bit thinner frames, so I'm not sure how well they'll hold up on the defensive glass. They can get some help from the wings, but ultimately, I think the strength of this defense is probably just the possessional size and length, and then these, like I mentioned, those guys aren't great on the glass, but I think the front court provides like rim protection depth. Like they have more guys than they had a season ago, I believe, or they just like maintain the same qualities as last year's team, like the rotation of Miller, Reed, and then Michael and Woko, who they all had above 4% block rates last season. And then I think Sutton and Rashad King at least provide some versatility. It's not like needle moving, like positional versatility, but I think they are solid scheme fits. And I think it should be a solid effective field goal percentage again because of this, and just like the depth of this roster. And like guy that we haven't mentioned is Mozzie Mosley, who I think actually can play a role on the offensive end. He's shown real strides over the last couple of years on both ends of the floor. So I think he's a guy that could slide in and play more of a role than most people project. So maybe he's able to slide in there, maybe help out with the shot diet a little bit too. But ultimately, I think this is going to be a really good first shot defense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think the front court group, and like you said, guys like Sutton, and Rashad King at 6'6", 6'7", offer some versatility. For me, weaknesses wise, I have real concerns with like the primary guard defenders, right? You've got like D-Dan Thomas, who's undersized. Like, they list him at 6'1", but I don't even know if he's that tall. And he's not a fantastic defender at all, right? He doesn't really create many plays. He had 1.2% steal rate last year, 1.4% for his career. Just a smaller guard that doesn't really offer a ton of like switchability. Doesn't really, pester you on the defensive end. He's more of an offensive minded, inefficient guard, right? And so I just have worries about him. And then, behind him, like you mentioned, maybe someone like Mosley. I don't know what the role is going to look like for a freshman like Jalen Reese. But I just think that there are concerns with the backcourt defense. I think, like you were saying, I think on the wing, it's a little bit better with guys like King and Sutton. But even behind them, like I think the depth is a little bit suspect. At like that 1 through 3 spot. So I have some real concerns with their ability to guard the basketball and really create plays. I don't think that this is a team that's going to force a ton of turnovers, like you said. I think they're going to be pretty good in the first shot defense, but like last year, 219th in turnover rate defense. I wouldn't be shocked if they finish worse than that this year. Just based on personnel alone. Like I have real concerns with like Max McKinnon on the defensive end. I mentioned on the offensive end his lateral movement and first step isn't the quickest. I think that's going to be a real problem in the SEC on the defensive end.
Yeah, that's my concern, is the point of attack defense with the guard group. And obviously it's going to get worse when you lose Cam Carter and Jai Bailey, who were very good defenders in their own right throughout their entire career. Cam Carter early in his career at K-State, and Jai Bailey at Richmond before he came over here. It created a pretty solid group. And the group of Thomas, McKinnon, PJ Carter too is not a good defender. Like, he's a good spot up shooter who could slide into and fit in on the offense a little bit. And and Mosley's not a fantastic defender, but I think it's pretty fair to say this is a much worse group. And if they don't have like some of the other qualities like they had last season, like the effective field goal percentage defense, it was 59th last year. Like, if if the guards aren't able to step up and do their part there, I think it could get worse. It's not a defense that really gets after you with this scheme. It's more, valuing limiting catch and shoot opportunities, like staying connected to off ball shooters and not playing in the gaps all that much, trusting their rim protection. And if they're not going to be great in any of those other areas, like, this perimeter group has to do their part, or else it's not going to be nearly as good as last season.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see what happens on this end of the floor. Shifting to team MVP and X Factor now, who'd you go with here?
I went with D-Dan Thomas as the MVP. I just think he's going to have to do a lot on the ball, and I think just his presence as a handler and facilitator to help this team just take care of the ball a little bit more often is probably going to end up being the most valuable trait of this offense. And for my X Factor, I went with Jalen Reed. I'm just not completely sure when we're getting him back, but I think he's a real boost for the front court offense. And I think he's the main guy that can really help out with the shot diet of all these guys who like struggle to score at the rim. I think he obviously is going to do it the best. And there's two-way qualities with him as well. Like, I think he's going to play the 4 a lot of the time. And, having that extra rim protector on the floor, that extra rebounder, and just that post presence that you can go to, I think is going to be key.
Yeah. I went D-Dan Thomas at MVP as well. Like you said, I think he's just going to be responsible for too much. Going to have the ball in his hands most of the time he's on the floor. So, and I think he's their best player on the offensive end. In terms of X Factor, I went with Rashad King. Actually, I think I'm just not really a Max McKinnon believer, at least on the ball. I think Rashad King someone's got to really step up, I think, on the ball. And, I think Rashad King has some scoring ability that can translate from Northeastern. I think he has some open court ability. I think he has versatility on both ends of the floor. So, I think he could be really important to this LSU team as like a secondary type creator alongside D-Dan Thomas. But we'll see what happens there. But before we wrap things up, ceiling and floor for this team, and then a bold prediction.
Yeah, I had their ceiling at 11th in the league. I still think there is room to get out of the bottom of the league with their athletes up front and their defensive backbone with their rim protection, and they have skilled offensive players on this roster, so I think they could be a little bit better than we imagine it. But ultimately, I think the floor is the bottom of the league. This is just a really good league, and if you have some glaring issues on both sides, like, it's going to be hard to keep them away from like the bottom 2 of the league.
Yeah, I went 12th at their ceiling. I just don't really, just looking at the SEC across the board, I just don't really know if they can get above that. And then at the floor, I said they could be at the bottom, like in that bottom 2, like you said. I think there's just not a ton here, and there are a lot of ways for this to go wrong in a league like this. So I think they're pretty. I know like Torvik projects them at 15th. There's definitely a lot of avenues for them to end up there. But in terms of bold prediction, I went with one that I've used with other teams throughout the offseason. I think that Matt McMahon gets let go. This will be year 4, and just not a ton of real progress here. So to me, it just seems like a natural exit. Especially if the season goes how we anticipate.
Yeah, I had the same one. I said it earlier in the offseason in the portal review. They haven't gained any traction yet. I mean, 2 years ago they went 9-9 in the league, but they actually finished worse than Torvik than they finished last season, and they had a 3-15 record in league. Like, they just haven't been able to, or McMahon just hasn't been able to find like the right roster or the right scheme to fit his roster. And there's just too many glaring issues this year as well. I can kind of see it going similar to last year, going 3-15 in the league and just not being able to rise up through the SEC. So yeah, I am in agreement.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. I mean, for Matt McMahon's sake, I hope they perform a little bit better and he keeps his job. But it's just not a fantastic looking roster. So we'll wrap things up here with LSU, and we'll see you next time on the Mainly Hoops podcast.